The first thing I do to get this aquarium going, as with pretty much every aquarium I do, is paint a black background on here. The reason I'm doing this is just to give more clarity and contrast to anything that might be poking through and anything that isn't covering up the back glass. With a flat and clean piece of glass, it usually takes about 3 to 5 thick coats of paint for full coverage. Next step, I start building an internal compartment for a small pump to create an internal sump filtration system. Because this is such a small aquarium, I'm trying to make the filter compartment as small as possible, only to fit the pump in there and nothing else, so there's no wasted space for any hardscape or plants. I'm using black expanded PVC board to build it and 100% silicone to secure everything in place. Once the silicone is cured, I do a test fit with the filter compartment to make sure no further modifications are needed. Once I know everything's going to fit properly, I take the filter compartment, tape it up to keep the lines of silicone all nice and clean, and just smush as much silicone as I can into the different gaps and seams. Once that silicone is cured, I start getting the equipment assembled to ensure that it's all going to work as planned. Once I have everything assembled and I get the pump turned on, it feels amazing to see that the proof of concept is working exactly as I wanted it to. I'm using some smaller pieces of Cereus stone to create a nice little effect of a rock wall for the background. Once I'm happy with the hardscape, or at least the background of it, I use aquarium safe silicone again to secure everything in place. That way I have more room to plant in between the different pieces of rocks. I also use more Cereus stone on top of the filter compartment to create even more of a 3D look with the background coming out. With just the stones in there, it looks kind of boring and one-dimensional, so I really wanted to spruce it up. I got some pieces of spiderwood and tried to create them to look like a root system encroaching on a river. I add a fair bit of nutrient dust into the aquarium because I want it to have a healthy carpet, as well as a consistent supply for nutrients of any rhizome plants whose roots decide to grow all the way down to the substrate. Then I cap off that section with a good clean sand to keep all the nutrients in the substrate system. Once everything's capped off, I finish off the hardscape with just a few more pieces of Cereus stone set throughout the base of the aquarium. And now we're finally on to my favorite part, the planting. For this aquarium, I used a lot of different rare species of plant, mainly consisting of different Anubias and Bucephalandras. Just like when I secured the wood, I use a cyanoacrylate superglue gel that is aquarium safe because it turns into essentially plastic once it's hardened. When I'm gluing the plants, I usually just take a small dab of superglue and put it on either the roots or the rhizome of the plant, depending on what seems like it could work better. Epiphyte plants are also awesome because they can hide a lot of the blemishes that you make while creating the aquarium. Right here I'm using a mix of different Bucephalandras and some Anubias to hide all of the areas of superglue that just look bad. When I call these plants rare, I don't know if they will be to you, but they are to me. They're different pieces of Anubias and Bucephalandra that I've been able to pick up over the years that I don't see around all that much. I try to keep in mind the direction that the plants are growing when I'm adding them into the aquarium so that I don't just have a mash of plants growing together, and that they grow with the different cracks in the rocks as well as the direction that the water is flowing. I also stay conscious about the amount of superglue that I'm using, because if you use too much, it can envelop the roots or rhizome of the plant and eventually suffocate it, and it'll die. I also think a lot of these plants are rare, not because they're difficult to keep or anything like that, but just because they have small leaves, so they appear to grow a lot more slowly. Once I'm all finished with the background of the aquarium and gluing the epiphytes, I start moving on to the base of the aquarium, firstly planting crypts and then moving on to some dwarf hairgrass. I like to cut off the tips of the dwarf hairgrass, not because it looks better right when you add it, but because it's easier to tell that it's growing once it is settled. After all the planting is finished, I get the pump secured and get it moved over to its new home. I always use a pitcher when I'm filling these so that I can do it very slowly as to not disturb any of the work that we just did. The light that I have for this aquarium is a Chihiro's RGB, which is definitely a little bit big and fancy, but it has a good app so I'm able to turn the power down to not create a bunch of algae. Because I'm not planning on adding any livestock in here apart from snails, I can be pretty harsh with the water changes, often performing up to 100%, but always around 50% at least. After a week, the aquarium's looking a little bit rough, but I consider this to be a really good thing. This is diatomaceous algae, and all it means right now is that life is progressing exactly as I should. What I do to take care of this is just wipe down the glass, take care of any large deposits on the plants, and get it filled right back up. It's been well over a year since I've built this aquarium, and it's progressed in every single way exceeding my expectations. Here you're seeing me do the first big full maintenance session that it's gotten since I've built it. I'm trimming up a lot of the plants because they've either grown into the path of the water flow, or they've started growing out of the water, or they've simply just grown too large for where I planted them. I'm also adding in some new Bucephalandras as well as a little piece of Anubias back where I had the cryptocoryne planted originally. I'm doing this just because the crypts never really took off and I want something to be growing well back there. The water changes haven't gotten all that different. There's still no livestock other than snails in here, so I can be fairly harsh, take out about 80%, clean down the glass, and then fill it right back up. Just about a month and a half after that big maintenance session, and you can see all of the plants starting to grow back in. The Anubiases are putting out new leaves, as well as the Buce starting to fill in the areas again. This aquarium has exceeded my expectations in almost every single way with how well it's been doing. So why don't you guys do the same and like and subscribe, and I'll see everybody in the next video.